Hi, I'm Güney Jahangirwa and I'm going to present our work, an empirical evaluation of Oracle improvement, which has recently been published at Transactions on Software Engineering. So, Oracle problem. In a typical software testing scenario, we have a software and the test, we generate test inputs, we execute them over software, and we get test outputs. At this point, we need a mechanism that will tell us whether these test outputs are correct or incorrect, and this mechanism is called an oracle. When evaluating the correctness of test outputs, Oracle should report all faulty behaviors, but only faulty behaviors. To explain this further, let's have a look at an example where we have a method that finds the max of two integers and it has an assertion oracle that claims that max should be greater than a. If we execute the test case of 0, 0 on this method, we would see that the assertion fails as max is actually equal to a, but the source code of this method does not have any faults. Therefore, this assertion oracle does not expose only faulty behaviors, and this test case is an evidence of a false positive. Continuing with the same method, let's now say that we have another assertion oracle and we have a fault that makes it max to be equal to b plus 1 instead of b. If we run a test case of 0, 1 on this faulty method, the max will become 2, but the assertion oracle will not react to it because max is still greater or equal to b. Therefore, we are aware that there is a fault, but our assertion does not react to it. And so it does not expose all faulty behaviors. And this test case paired with this fault is an evidence of a false negative. These notions of a false positive and a false negative lie in the heart of our approach for Oracle assessment and improvement, which is a part of our previous work. So the idea behind OASIS is that we have an initial assertion oracle, we pass it to OASIS, and using test case generation and mutation testing, OASIS is able to provide evidences of false positives and false negatives, as shown in the example before, and it passes them to the developer for manual refinement. This is the assess part of our approach. And afterwards, the developer is responsible for coming up with an improvement step that will remove these false positives and false negatives from the initial assertion oracle. This is an iterative process that can go on until OASIS is not able to provide new evidences for false positives and false negatives. As the human is in the loop of this process, whether this automated assessment process and semi-automated improvement process is beneficial for developers is an important question, which we have tried to answer as part of this current work that I'm presenting. For this purpose, we have conducted two studies. The first one is the assessment study. So the idea here is to analyze whether developers are actually able to manually detect these false positives and false negatives, because if they are, then maybe the value of the approach is not that high. So for this, we have recruited 33 master degree students that were studying computer science at University of Trento at the time, and 6 professional developers from the Upwork freelancing platform. We have provided each developer with 2 Java classes, and each Java class had 3 assertions in it. We conducted these experiments in 3 different sessions, and each session started with a training where we explained it to the developers what is a false positive, what's a false negative, and etc. And then the developers proceeded with the task. The task, so the idea was that for each of these assertions, the developer indicates whether he or she thinks that it has a false positive, has a false negative, doesn't have any of it, or they could pick an option of, I don't know. So afterwards, the developer was asked to fill the final questionnaire. So this chart provides a brief overview of our results, and as we can see, only in 30% of cases, the developers were able to correctly identify a false positive, false negatives, or their absence. And if we look at the results for students and professionals specifically, we can see that professional developers performed this task better, as their correctness rate was almost twice higher. Our next study is the improvement study. And here the idea is, if we tell the developer that this assertion oracle is not perfect, it has a false positive or has a false negative, will they be able to come up with an improvement step that would remove those false positives or false negatives? To go on with this study, we recruited 19 PhD students and postdocs and 10 professional developers, again from the Upwork platform. We divided this pool of participants into two groups. One was doing the improvement using OASIS, while the other was doing the improvement manually without support of any tool. Here, the developers worked with one Java class, and that class had two assertions in it, one of which had false positives and the other had a false negative. So for this experiment, we went with one-by-one sessions. So we conducted 29 sessions overall. And again, we started with initial training where we explained what are false positives, false negatives, what is Oracle improvement, and etc. Then we proceeded with practice task, which was done in collaboration between the participant and the person who was conducting the experiment. And the idea was to ensure that the developer understands the task and is able to successfully perform it for 4 simple methods that we used for this practice task. The group that was going to use OASIS for the improvement also received the training on the tool. And after this, the participants proceeded with the final improvement task, followed again by a questionnaire. We report our results for improvement study using these two terms, fully correct and partially correct. By fully correct, we mean that this final improved assertion had no false positives and no false negatives. While by partially correct, we mean that there were no false positives, but some false negatives were allowed. So as we can see from the chart, when doing improvement with OASIS, developers were able to achieve better results. For example, for assertion 1 with manual improvement, the full correctness was only 43%, while with OASIS it was 100%. Similarly, when doing manual improvement, they were not able to achieve full correctness, but with OASIS it was possible to achieve full correctness for 33% of the cases. Of course, what I've been presenting so far is a very brief overview of our paper. So if you're interested in details, please check out the full text of the paper. Also, if you're interested in Oracle problem in general and in the assessment and improvement of assertion oracles in particular, I would strongly encourage you to check out our previous work and the very recent work that would be presented at FSC 2020 this year. The source code of OASIS, as well as all the data that we have collected during these human studies, is available on OASIS's GitHub page. That's it on my side, and thanks a lot for your attention.